Well, welcome everyone to the Mind Body Medicine Network's webinar, Clearing a Space, a Brief Focusing Practice for Cultivating Resilience in Your Clients with particular attention to patients in crisis or coping with illness with Dr. Joan Klagsbrun. And this is Ed Glauser, the owner and the principal clinician with the Mind Body Medicine Network and your host for our webinar. And I am honored to have the following exemplary colleagues joining us this evening. Of course, our presenter, Joan Klagsbrun, Ph.D., and our producer, Heather Butts. And if you'll notice, we have Heather Butts. She is an attorney, has a master's in public health, has some wonderful background to assist us with this evening. And I'll be introducing formally Dr. Klagsbrun in a few minutes. But for now, our producer, Heather Butts, will be sharing some important technical information about the technology part of our platform and sharing some information with you about Learn for Life Consulting, LLC. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to our producer, Heather Butts. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much, Ed. So it's a pleasure to be here, and you're in for a real treat this evening with this webinar. My name is Heather Butts, and I'm the founder of Learn for Life Consulting, and my organization does online training and education for individuals, and we assist people with their online education platforms. So that is what we do. I'm going to give you a couple of tips and some rules to follow as we go through this webinar, and hopefully they will make your experience that much more enjoyable and seamless. So I will be responding to any technical issues throughout the webinar. If you do have any technical issues, please type them in the chat area. I will be monitoring the chat area the entire evening, and so I will be able to address them as they come up. Please take a moment to look at the control panel where you see our presenter's picture and the MBMN logo, and click on the arrow next to the word host, and you'll see that the chat area will actually expand, so you'll have more room to actually write your questions or any issues that you have. To hear the audio through the computer and not have to use the phone, please click on the listen icon. Please do not use the Ask a Question icon, as if you ask a question there, it will not be able to be answered during this webinar. Instead, please use the chat area for any questions that you have. And finally, your presenter and host will respond to content questions from the chat in about 60 minutes from now. So we're going to reserve the last 30 minutes of the webinar, more or less, for questions. So if you type in questions during the webinar, I will be able to triage them, but we would like for you to also remember that we will have questions at the end, and you can ask them there as well. And Ed, I'm going to hand it back over to you now.
Heather, thank you so much, and I'm so excited to have this opportunity to be with everyone this evening. You are in for a treat. We have so much wonderful information and experiential learning that we actually may only have about 10 to 15 minutes left for questions, but if your question has not been answered this evening, please email Ed Glauser at info@mindbodymedicinenetwork.com, and Heather will be putting that up in the chat area, so we leave no stone unturned. So before we dive into our webinar this evening, I'm so pleased to share some information about the Mind Body Medicine Network itself. So the beginning of the network started at the last face-to-face conference of the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. And so I was very passionate about making sure that all clinicians who practiced mind-body medicine from around the world would continue to have an organization where we can learn from each other throughout the year, where clients, patients, the lay public can help us spread the reach of mind-body medicine in all facets of healthcare and have an open dialogue amongst clinicians, the public, about the tremendous effects of mind-body medicine in really vastly improving and empowering the lives and health of people from all walks of life, and show how we all have the capacity to alleviate pain, sleep, stress issues that are getting in the way of feeling better and enjoying life. So we have the power to self-regulate to make our lives and our health better. So our clinical webinars are the primary way that we accomplish the mission of the Mind-Body Medicine Network. And for more information, you can go to the Mind-Body Medicine Network's website listed below on this slide to see the rich and diverse webinar presentations we'll be offering throughout 2012 and 2013. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Joan Klagsbrun. She is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in the Boston area. She has served on the faculty of Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts since 1976 in the Graduate Counseling Psychology Division, specializing in holistic and health psychology. And in terms of Joan's background in focusing, she has a wonderful personal statement about focusing, and it's as follows. Focusing has helped Joan define and express what is most meaningful and most alive within herself. As a result, she is passionate about teaching this life-giving practice to others. She learned focusing from Eugene Genlin in 1976, and since then she has had the pleasure of teaching focusing to over 1,000 people, the general public, psychology and theology graduate students, and healthcare and mental health professionals. As a practicing psychologist, Joan has integrated focusing into her work with individuals and couples. Since 1998, she has been facilitating training groups for psychotherapists and pastoral counselors, which are competency-based, and which she can lead to certification as a focused, oriented therapist or counselor. And the reason, really, while we're here tonight is probably because of Joan Klagsbrun. Joan really showed me what focusing and clearing the space was all about when I visited her last year in Boston, and I think it was because of this process that it gave me the confidence to launch the Mind-Body Medicine Network. It was transformative. During our dress rehearsal yesterday, we did the same process, and it was so meaningful and transformative, and I think you'll find that to be that way this evening. And the beautiful thing is this webinar is recorded, so you'll want to listen to it again and again, and you'll be receiving a recording within the next 2 days, and with each review of the recording, you'll just deepen your healing and your clinical expertise if you're a healthcare professional, and if you're from the lay public, you will get so much out of this webinar, which will help you in so many ways. So without further ado, I turn it over to my dear friend, Joan Klagsbrun. Joan, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, for such a generous introduction. I'm very touched. And I'm delighted to be here tonight and to be presenting this method because it's very close to my heart. It's the first step in the focusing process. And I wanted to share this with you because I hope it's something that you can actually take away from our time on this webinar and can really use it in your own life and in your practices. And I love it because I found it so useful for me both personally and professionally. So I tend to clear a space anytime in my personal life when I feel stuck or overwhelmed, stressed, scattered, preoccupied, or just needing a shift in perspective. And in my 35 years of clinical practice, I have found that it can be applied to a wide variety of populations, from children to adults, to families, to medical patients, psychotherapy clients, and to students. So I'm very excited you're here, and my hope is that you'll find it just even half as useful as I do. So what is clearing a space? Well, it's a method for finding what I call inner sanctuary, a place of safety where we can rediscover our strength, our resilience, and a new perspective, a larger perspective. So I'm going to say it in another way too. It's a way to set aside the jumble of thoughts, opinions, and analysis that we all carry in our minds and make a clear, quiet space inside where something new can come. And we can learn that when we can feel at peace or a sense of harmony or clarity, even when our problems aren't solved. So that's, I hope, something that we'll touch on too. I'd like to start with the words of a client who described her experience of clearing a space, and she said, "It's like coming home to myself after being away for a long time. I can rest there with all of me. I didn't know that there is this inner home that's the essence of me and it's free of my problems." So I'm hoping that you will come to that experience yourself tonight of feeling that you can find the essence of yourself free of your issues and concerns, and then it's something that you can also share with people in your life and with your clients and patients. One of the things I like about the clearing of space is it's a very brief method. It can take from 5 minutes to 25 minutes, depending on how you do it, and I have found that it's very accessible. Even people who have trouble with relaxation or meditation can sometimes find this practice useful and helpful because they're being guided. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you can do this method by yourself. But like most human processes, it's a practice that can be easier when you have a partner. And what I mean by a partner is any unobtrusive person who will just be there as you slowly notice what's between you and feeling fine at that particular moment. And another thing I love about it is you can keep your content perfectly private, or you can say it out loud. So if I were having a clearing a space exchange with Ed right now, I might just say, "Ed, you don't need to tell me what's coming up for you. Just signal me with your finger, and then I'll go on to the next instruction." Right? So you can be very private, or you can share it. So my goals for this presentation is to share with you what clearing a space is, to share how it was created. It has a pretty interesting origin, and how it's been empirically validated on a couple of different populations. And then we're going to get to practice the method together, and I hope by the end you'll come away with a new application of a way that you can help yourself and your clients and patients with reducing stress and increasing a sense of well-being. Okay, next slide. So how do we clear a space? I'm going to take us through it now, describing it, and then in a few moments we'll actually have an experience of it. So we begin by noticing what is between you and feeling perfectly fine. And in this first question, when we ask it this way, we can say what's between you and feeling fine, but we can use other words there. What's between you and feeling free? What's between you and feeling whole? What's between you and feeling compassion for yourself, right? There are many different ways, but for today we'll just use the generic what's between you and feeling fine. And the second step is to sense what is in your body, what you're carrying right now in your body that's in the way of feeling fine. And this is different from the list of problems or issues or concerns you might have in your life, right? Do you get the difference? At any time, if I handed you a piece of paper and say, write down everything that's in the way of your life being perfectly fine, if you're like me, you might ask for a second piece of paper, because that can be a pretty long list. But actually, when we sense inside our bodies, as human beings, we usually only have the experience at one time of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different issues that are weighing on us currently in the moment. So tonight, maybe somebody in your life is ill and you're worried about them, but in a few minutes when you check inside, that may or may not be what's there, right? You might be surprised by what you find inside. In fact, I'd say you have to be willing to be surprised, because this is a process where you're not using your usual mind. You're sensing into what you're carrying right now on a bodily level. So it's not what you think you should be worried about, or what's in the way of feeling perfectly fine. It's what you actually find when you go there. And then we put down each stress-producing concern one at a time. Now, most of us actually hold our stress as one big ball of yarn, kind of one large mass where the different stresses sort of add to each other and make for a kind of a stress weight that's heavy. And in this process, we're actually going to take each strand of that stress ball one at a time. And we're going to get the name of each one, and we're going to get the sense of what it's like to be us struggling with that one, right? And then we're going to take a moment to get a whiff of it. And I say that because we don't want to fall into it, right? We're not actually working on our problems. We're simply taking an inventory of them. We want to just get a sense of what it's like to have this issue right now with me, right? And sometimes we'll notice that we'll feel it in a part of our body. We'll have a sense of there's a tightness in my chest about that, or I feel some contraction in my abdomen. And sometimes we won't feel it in that way. We'll just feel an overall sense of tightness or constriction or something, right? But we really want to be noticing how we're carrying each issue, because it's an embodied process. It's not a mental process, right? And then the third step is we're going to put down each stress-producing concern one at a time. And we do that by placing each one at the right distance away. And interestingly, each one knows the right distance it needs to go, right? So I often use the image of wrapping up each issue as a package and putting it down in the right place. But that imagery might or might not work for you or your clients. And so we're going to find the right image for each client, and we can do that because we're working one-on-one, and they'll let us know if that works for them. And what I have found interesting is that we can intuit each issue knows the distance it needs to be. So some issue might want to stay very close to us, maybe very sore or tender, and it might want to just go right next to us. Another issue might need to go to Kansas or China, right? And then there are very creative ways that you'll find your clients will come up with on their own. And for example, I have a client who takes her issues and puts them out in little yellow sailboats. And she has the image of just sending them each out on the water, and that gives her a sense of inner relief. Another one always seems to want to put one issue on the moon and one in Venus, right? She needs a lot of distance to get a big perspective. And then I have a third client who's somebody who imagines that she's the owner of a guest house. And she said she takes each of her issues as they come up. She takes them and puts them in a room and locks the door, and only she has the key to that room. So when they're all safely locked in and she feels some space, then she'll go on to focusing, which is we won't get to do tonight, but which is often connected to clearing a space, and then she'll choose one of those issues to work on, right? So this process of clearing a space encourages a lot of creativity and playfulness. And when we place our issues at a right distance, we find that fresh information can become available to us, and we can move beyond a stuck pattern. There's just something about taking this issue that we've been mulling over and that's been very stuck, and just imagining playfully wrapping it up and putting it behind a rock or behind a couch or whatever, and suddenly something shifts in us and we can often get new information or new insight about it. Right? And another step is that after we place each issue aside, and we're not, by the way, abandoning our issues, we're just getting a little respite from them. So after we place each one aside, we want to check inside to see if we feel lighter, or do we feel a little physical relief and mental and spiritual relief by putting them down or not. And if we don't feel that relief, there are some other steps we can do to get that sense of relief. Right? And next slide, please.
So before we go to the next slide, Joan, and you may want to answer this now or later, but for example, I had a client today that asked me if their concern or issue is not identifiable, that it's just a general amorphous blob, like a murky state, as opposed to being able to actually name her stress or issue specifically, what should she then do with clearing a space?
Lovely question. And that can happen, of course, that a person feels just some kind of amorphous dread in their body and they don't know what it's connected to, right? So they will want to really slow down and say, so can you really get a sense of that? And how are you holding that? Does it feel jittery or heavy or tight? And is there a shape or a color? So we'll want to really just slow down and spend some time really feeling it. And sometimes just that slowing down, she'll say, oh, yes, it's I haven't done my taxes. That's what the dread is about. But if it isn't become clear to what it is, that's fine. We can work with it that way too. We can say, so let's just take that whole amorphous thing that you're feeling kind of heavy in your chest, and let's see if we can make it, we'll just call it that one. And just let's see if we can make a package or in some way place that one at the right distance away. And what would be the right distance for that one so that you can really get some relief from it? And then she might know, well, that one I'd actually have to place pretty far away so I can breathe clearly. All right? So that's what we do, Ed. We would slow down and see if we could find the name of it, but if we couldn't, that doesn't really matter. We would just take it out and place it aside, and maybe later it will get clear to her what it is.
Sounds wonderful, Joan. Thank you for answering that.
So following placing down the 3 or 5 issues, and of course we do it until the person gets clear inside. So sometimes it may be 2 issues, and sometimes it could be 6, and your client will tell you, right, or your partner, you'll tell your partner, no, I have another one that's just come up, right? But when we kind of have put down the main issues that we're carrying in that moment, then we find a background sense, and that's an interesting one. A background sense is kind of the flavor or the mood that we have in the background, and sometimes that becomes like the wallpaper we don't even notice anymore because it's so typical of us that we don't even notice it. And so we might say to a person, so now see if you can find your background sense that's typical of you that you might feel this evening, and maybe it's feeling a little rushed or trying too hard or a little anxious or a little sad. So we give some options, right? And then wait and see what the background sense is at that moment. And then we'll see if we can wrap that one up or place it in a bottle or in some ways place it outside of the body so we can notice who we are, who we would be without that one. Huh? And that can be very powerful for people because we're so attached to those flavors or those moods that we rarely get a sense of who would I be if I weren't always trying so hard, if I weren't always anxious, right? And then the best part comes, because then we actually take a vacation from all of those concerns and issues, and we spend 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, and we just stay in the clearer space, as clear as we got it, right? And in that space, we often can notice that we are not our problems, even though we have them. We can really feel that we're much larger than them. Right? And I think it's useful after someone has spent a couple of minutes there, just being with that, to see if they can find a word or a phrase or a gesture or an image that would capture the feel of that cleared space. So people might say words like spacious, or it's open, or it's sacred, or I have an image of being on a beach or in the mountains. And I think it's very useful to name the cleared space because it's easier then to anchor it and to get it back again. It becomes a resource, an internal resource that can be called upon in times of crisis or difficulty. And then the last question, I don't always ask, but it's a good one to know about, is to ask what I call a life-forward step that comes right from the cleared space. And an example of a life-forward step is to ask somebody, would it be good to ask yourself, how can I have more of that in my life? And then just wait and see what your body knows there. Right? Because this is a method of listening to what our body knows. And our body always knows more than we do. So we can get additional information that we haven't known. Next slide.
So, Joan, before we move on, the clearing of space seems very visually oriented. If a person is not visually oriented, how can they benefit from the clearing of space process?
Another great question, Ed. Well, a couple things come to mind to say, and the first is that people who are not very visual generally can visualize their house. So you might say to them, can you see yourself sitting in your living room? Right? And most people can do that, or sitting on your bed or whatever. And then we can say so that when the issue comes up, just see where in your living room you'd want to put it. Right? And then they can say, I want to put it on the couch next to me, or I need to put it all the way across the room, or hey, I'm going to put it in the kitchen. Right? So it's useful for people who don't think they're visual to find that actually we all are kind of visual if we can find the right place. And so a house is a good way to do that. But another good way for people who have trouble visualizing is to actually use art materials and to have people create a drawing or a collage or some way that they are concretizing the issue. So they can draw or use art materials or clay to find a way to express each issue. And then also when we come to the clear space, it's extremely useful, and I do this even with clients who are good at visualizing, to sometimes have them draw the cleared space, the texture, the color, the shape of the cleared space. And again, it becomes then a way for it to become more real and to become an even more powerful resource to use. So, and that's also wonderful with children.
Well, thank you so much for that. I know my client will be very pleased to hear your responses. So now moving on to 2 prerequisites for clearing a space.
So in order to clear a space, we actually have to treat ourselves in a way that for some of us is radically different from how we normally do. Because let's face it, most of us are ruder to ourselves than we are to any other living being. Right? And our inside places, really, which we need to hear from, aren't going to be willing to come forth if they're going to be met with criticism or negativity. Right? So we need to cultivate an attitude of friendliness to whatever we find there. And it kind of is an attitude of curiosity, of respect, of a kind of a welcoming, friendly way to be with something. And we don't have to like what we find there, what comes up for us, but I kind of take the attitude, it's there anyway, so we might as well be friendly to it, right? So we kind of take that playful attitude with it. So that's the first, is to be gentle with it, right? And the second is to remember that we want to notice how our body is holding each issue, right? So we want to come down into the body and really, it's not just saying, oh, I know I had a fight with my boyfriend and mad at my kid, right? We want to really just see, so how's that fight that I had, how am I holding that where am I feeling that in my body? Because this is an embodied, it's not a theoretical process, it's an embodied process. And if we don't first get a whiff of it in our bodies, really notice, oh, that fight, now I can feel it kind of like a thud. Then when we take it out, we won't feel the relief, right? So those are two important skills that are kind of prerequisites for clearing a space. Taking what we call a focusing attitude, a friendly attitude to ourselves, and then remembering to slow down and to notice how we're holding each issue in our body. So clearing a space reminds us that well-being is our natural state. When we ask what's between me and feeling fine or having a sense of well-being, in a way we're seeding this notion, maybe subtly, that well-being is really where we are underneath our issues and concerns. Right? And that's important. Einstein said we cannot change a problem with the same energy that caused it. Right? And so clearing a space is getting us to another state of being that has a sense of well-being to it. And then when we go back and work on our problems and concerns, we're bringing a different kind of energy with it. So it reminds us that well-being is our natural state. I like to think of it like a blue sky that's always there. Yes, big, huge thunderclouds come in the way, but we can kind of move the clouds aside and get a glimpse of the blue sky. It also reminds us that we are not our problems and concerns or our thoughts or even our feelings, right? That we're much larger. We have all of those. We have problems, but we are not them. So it teaches us a little bit how to be a witness to our issues and concerns. And the third thing it reminds us is that there is often a sense of calmness, of spaciousness, of aliveness that lies beneath our current challenges, no matter what our current situation is, no matter how dire our trauma or illness or crisis is, that we can usually find some moments of calmness through this and other processes too, like meditation and so forth, and relaxation and guided imagery. But this is also a process where we can find a part of us that is kind of enduringly has a sense of well-being. So now I'd like to share with you where this process came from. And you see on the screen a picture of Eugene Genlin, who is a now 86-year-old philosopher, psychologist who lives in New York. And I'm happy to say I visited with him recently, and he is still spending hours a day writing philosophy papers. And he came to focusing through his philosophy of the implicit. He was a philosopher at the University of Chicago, and he had a philosophy of the implicit, as he called it. And he believed that change happens when we can feel more in our bodies than we can cognitively understand. Right? If you can stay right at that edge, he thought, that's where something new happens. That's where something can open up, right? And his dissertation was called Experiencing and the Creation of Meaning. But he didn't want to just be another academic philosopher. He actually wanted to bring his philosophy of the implicit to a practice so that it could be useful for people. And the practice he chose was psychotherapy. So he went to Carl Rogers, who was probably a few doors down from him at the University of Chicago, and Carl Rogers trained him in client-centered psychotherapy. And then the two of them embarked on a series of psychotherapy research studies that I think are still relevant for us today. And the question they asked is, what makes psychotherapy successful? Why is it that one person in psychotherapy for a year seems to really get better, and another person is just kind of marking time? And so they looked at many different kinds of psychotherapy that were being practiced in Chicago at that time: client-centered psychotherapy, psychoanalytic psychotherapy, Gestalt therapy, etc. And they looked at, they tape recorded hundreds of hours of psychotherapy, and they found that they could actually predict who in a year's time was going to get better in psychotherapy and who wasn't. And they could predict that by listening to randomly chosen 5 and 10 minute segments from first and second sessions. I mean, this is pretty amazing. They could predict from first and second sessions who was going to get better in a year's time. So how did they do that? Well, they found that it had nothing to do with the type of therapy, whether people were practicing client-centered or psychoanalytic therapy, etc. It had nothing to do with the topics that were discussed, if people were talking about their transferences or what they did that day. And even the skill, the compassion of the therapist wasn't the key factor, which is pretty disappointing to those of us in the profession. So but research, right? We want to know what the truth is with research. So what was the truth that they found? Well, they found that the important factor was how clients were relating to their inner experience. The clients who were successful were doing something different than the unsuccessful clients. And it wasn't that they were crying more or using more tissues or even having more intellectual insights. So what were they doing? They were able to reference their presently felt experience. Right? They were connecting to an unclear but distinct bodily sense of the particular issue they were talking about, and then they stayed with it till it changed. And then they were informed about the next steps, right? So they were kind of halting and groping. They weren't staying with their narrative. They were kind of looking for what the right words that would fit what they knew was true inside. And they were either directly or indirectly referencing something they could feel in their bodies. So I'm going to give you an example of what such a successful client might have sounded like on their audio tapes. So last night, I went to visit my sister, and she's drinking again, and I was just so mad at her, so frustrated. Is that it? I don't know. Let me see. Boy, I can feel it right here. It's in my chest. It's so tight there. It's like, what is it? I wasn't really mad at her, but what is it? It's more, oh, yeah. It's more like disappointed in her and really sad, yeah. So disappointed and sad that she's drinking again, that's it. So could you hear they were the people who were willing to say something and then be willing to amend it. Right? And those were the people who in a year's time got better. So Jenlin was very excited about this, and he found that, in fact, with the successful clients, there was a murky, unclear, next slide, vague felt sense that over time and with inner attention came into clearer focus. And that's how he named it focusing, because like the lens of what's now an old-fashioned camera, right, it starts very fuzzy, and then you kind of tune that lens, and it clarifies. And that's what this process is like. So with focusing and with clearing a space, we're starting with something that's not yet clear, that's murky, that's vague, that we can feel in our bodies that we don't even have words for, right? And then if we stay with it, it can often clarify. So after the research, he created a 7-step or 6 or 7-step protocol for doing essentially what successful clients already knew how to do in therapy. And he called it focusing. And since then, focusing has applications for use in therapy. It actually works with any kind of therapy. So what I love about it is that it can join with anything you're already doing, and it can also be used in medicine, in business, in the arts. Any time that healing or understanding is sought, it's always useful to go to see what the body knows, to not just stay with our mental knowing. And it's not instead of our mental knowing, it's in addition. So we want to kind of come downstairs to the body as well as going upstairs to the mind, if we're going to make that distinction. And so I want to tell you about the history of clearing a space. Initially, Jenlin was thinking of focusing as a method for solving problems, right? But he kind of discovered that people did better with focusing, with solving problems in this 6-step process he described, if at first they spent some time not trying to solve a problem, but just sort of taking an inventory and seeing what was there. Just kind of getting into relationship with their issues before they chose one to work on, right? And then during the 1970s and 80s, many practitioners began to find that this step, this very short first step, could be used as a freestanding and pretty brief, rapid stress management technique or tool with all kinds of populations. And so from suicidal patients to children in schools. And there was some research done in education at that time, I think in the 70s and 80s, in which they found that if children were guided by their teacher, elementary school children, to spend 5 or 10 minutes just noticing what was in the way of feeling happy or being fine, and were able to kind of place aside, and of course children had a wonderful imagination. They could do a great, they're easy with this, so they had no trouble doing that, just placing aside or drawing or in some ways putting those aside. When they went to their reading lesson, they had much better reading comprehension. And it makes sense, right? When we're preoccupied, it's very hard to learn. And when we're preoccupied, it's also hard to find one thing. We're sort of jumping all over the place. So I often use this with clients in a very brief way, without even telling them what I'm doing, to just say, before we begin today, I know you have a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, a lot going on in your life. Maybe just take a moment to slow down and to take a moment and just see, kind of what's in the way of what we need to pay attention to tonight, or what's in the way of being fine today, right? Either one. And then they'll just say, oh, there's this and there's that. And then I'll say, and what if that needs our attention most, right? So that's the 3-minute version of clearing a space. And I'll also talk later about how it can be used in medical appointments too. So before I get to a case study, which I'll talk about, I thought I would give you a chance right now. You've been doing some listening, to just take a moment to sense into yourself right now, and for you to just kind of say hello to yourself and to see how you are tonight, okay? So I'm just going to take a moment here to guide you. So you might want to put down any pen or paper and just close your eyes if that feels comfortable. And I'd like you just to pay attention to your breathing. And now just notice if you can say hello to yourself. And just take a moment to see what it's like to be you here tonight. Just going to say hello. How am I tonight? And then instead of rushing to answer, take a little time to notice what comes from your body. And you might see if there's a word or a phrase or an image that would capture how it feels to be you. It might even be a gesture. Something that would really be a match for how it is to be you tonight. And then when you're ready, just bring yourself back into the room, into our virtual circle. And just see if you feel a little bit more present to yourself, having taken the time to just make that inner connection. And I wonder if Heather and Ed, you'd be willing to just share if there was a word or a phrase or an image that came for you.
Well, this is Ed, and for me, I guess being the host tonight and operating my computers, the image that came to me is an airport control tower. So I feel like an airport control tower.
Great.
Right. And this is Heather. The image that came to me was literally the chat area, but in a positive way.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's great. So I'll just say that my image was of a horse that was going very quickly and then just took some time to stop galloping and to be at a much slower pace, and that felt really good. So we wish we could hear from all of you, but later when I take you through the clearing of space process, maybe you will share on the chat what came for you there, and so we can all sort of share with each other what we got there. But right now I would like to present to you a little case study to show you how I've used it in psychotherapy. And so I'm going to be speaking about a woman I'm going to call Jody, who was a 35-year-old counselor and mother of 2 small children, who had metastatic breast cancer, and who came to me saying that my cancer has returned. It's in my bones. I don't know how much longer I have to live, but the time I have here, I don't want to be snapping at my husband. I don't want to be impatient with my kids, and I'm behaving in ways that I don't like, and I know that it's because I'm very stressed. And she said, I've tried progressive relaxation, and that helps a little bit. I've tried meditation, and sometimes that works, and sometimes I'm just too anxious. And so I wonder if you have any other kind of stress-reducing ways that you can help me with. And so I actually taught her the clearing of space method, and she took to it immediately. And of course, all clients don't take to any one method, which is why we need to have so many of them in our toolbox. But she loved it, and every week she would kind of come into my office, head for the couch, flop down, and say, okay, Joan, help me clear my space. And what I found interesting was that the things she shared with me each week in her clearing of space were very different than those that she shared with her very extensive support network. She had a big family who was very supportive. She had lots of friends, a loving husband, a mother she was close to. But I noticed that most of the things that she shared with me in her clearing of space were too frightening to share with them. And so this process became a way for her to be really honest with herself and to say what was truly there for her. And I am remembering a particular day when she came into the office, and she looked particularly distressed that day. And when she said, please, let's start by clearing a space, we began, and I began by doing a little relaxation with her, made sure that she was breathing, that she said hello to herself. And then I said, so now just notice what's in the way of feeling fine today. And the first thing that came up for her was that she said that she had this bone pain that was in her right hip. And so I asked her to spend a little time going inside of it and noticing the quality of it without falling into it. Okay? And she said, well, it's kind of a drilling sensation like a dentist drill. It's not excruciating. She said, it's just kind of a dull, achy sort of pain. And I said, okay, and where would you like to place this so we can place it outside of you? And she said, well, at first I'm going to put some colorful pillows that are here on your couch between me and the pain so I won't feel it too much. And I said, okay. And then she said, I want to take the pillows and the pain and I'm going to put them together and sort of put a big package around them and place it across the room. She said, in fact, I'm going to put it behind the couch so I don't even have to see it. So then I said, okay. And I asked her to come back inside and see how it was to be her without that one. And she said that the pain was less. Now, this is interesting, right, because this is physiological pain. But, of course, there's always stuff that accumulates around pain, right? There's the dread of it. Oh, here it is again. There's the fear. Is this going to get worse? What does this mean, right? So she was able to put aside all the anxiety that the pain had stirred up, and that gave her some relief. So then I said to her, okay, except for that, are you feeling fine and well inside? And the next thing she said was, well, I can feel some tightness in my chest. And she said, at first, I don't know what it is. So I just invited her, so just stay with it and see if there's a texture or a weight or what the feel of it is. And she said, oh, yeah, now it comes to me. It's a fear I have that my children won't be raised as Christians. My husband is Jewish. I know he's involved with his faith, but while we've agreed to raise our kids as Episcopalian, I'm afraid that if I die, my husband won't be able to keep that promise to me and that they'll drift away from being Christians. And that was disappointing to her. And so she stayed with that a little bit. And I said, so where would you like to wrap up that issue? How would you like to take that one and just for a moment take it outside of your body? And this is not to abandon our issues. This is just to get a little space from them. And so she said, I'm going to wrap this up and make a beautiful package out of it. And she said, I'm going to hand it to my minister, whom I spoke with this morning, because she's promised to stay in touch with my children as long as she's in town. And that was very comforting to me. So she had it with her minister, and I said, okay, and notice if it's a little lighter without that inside. And she said, it is lighter, but I'm also feeling a kind of heaviness in my heart. And she began to cry, and she said, I'm afraid that my 3-year-old son won't remember me. I'm totally the center of his life right now, but depending on how long I'm around, I'm just afraid, what if he doesn't remember this time, how much fun we have together and our love for each other. I had tears, she had tears. And I said, so we're hearing this and honoring this very delicate, sad issue, and how would you like to wrap this one up, and where would you like to put it? And she said, I'm going to wrap this one in silk, and I'm going to put it in the hands of my best friend. And so she did, and she put it down. I watched her breathe. She took a little time. And, of course, this is the hardest thing a mother can possibly have to face. And yet there was something about acknowledging it that I could see relieved her, because her body knew it was there anyway. So now she was naming what she'd been carrying there. And so there was a relief in naming it and just placing it down. And then I said, so you have some very difficult issues there, but check inside and see if, except for those, you're all fine inside. And she said, well, not yet. I have a kind of a pain right in my stomach and my abdomen, and I know what that one's about. I'm just afraid that my daughter, who I know she won't forget me, she's 10 years old, but I'm afraid that she won't remember me as happy, because this last year I've been so cranky with the chemo, and I've been tired, and I don't play with her as much, and we're not reading as much. So I said, okay, just spend a little time with that issue. Please don't fall into it. Just get a whiff of it. And we can always come back and work on that one later. So she did, and she said, this one, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to put that one in your lap. I want you to hold that one. And so I then said to her, is there a background sense there for now that you've put down all of those issues that you're carrying? And she said, yes, it's kind of a static-y feeling. It's kind of like on television when the stations are over, but you can still sort of see the static. And so she put the static down, and I said, I remember making a joke with her that day saying, well, it's a little bit like that joke, except for that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? And she chuckled, and I laughed. I said, but except for those very difficult issues, how are you inside? And she said, you know, it's funny, if those issues were all resolved, I really would feel okay. So I said, just allow yourself to just dwell in that clear space where you really can know that you would be okay. We can come back to all those tough issues. And so she stayed very quiet, and I could see the tension in her shoulders relax. I could see the lines in her face kind of ease up. And so I said to her, can you share where you are? And she said, I'm back in the French Alps. It's summertime. It's a place my husband and I visited. And the words that come there are simple and divinely peaceful. She sat quietly, and then she just described the whole scene to me. I'm on a hill overlooking a valley. The sun is streaming. I hear cowbells in the distance. And I can feel the presence of something very sacred here. So I said that back to her. You can feel the presence of something really sacred there. Is there more, I said, you'd like to remember from this cleared space that you can take back into your life? And she said, I want to remember the quality of this peace. It fills me up, and I feel it'll last forever, even after I'm gone. So she had this wonderful experience of feeling that sense of well-being. And if we look to see what happened to Jody in her clearing of space, one is that she got to acknowledge very difficult issues and give a name to them. And that, in a way, is like giving a home to each of these issues. It's validating them. It's giving them credibility. And the second is she became a witness to these fearful, challenging issues. Instead of being in the fear, she became a witness to us, and that allowed her, to find a place, to cultivate a place of calmness. And what she later said was she rediscovered the part of herself that was very peaceful and calm. That was there too. There was blue sky, even though the clouds had temporarily taken over. And she could go back to that blue sky and remember how it felt to be her in the Alps. She could regain that sense of well-being again. And what I find in clearing a space is that problems become more manageable as when they're separated one by one. Right? They had been a big clump of stress when she came in, but in that 15, 20 minutes it took for her to go through that experience, she came to a place of more calm and peacefulness. And then we went back and worked on one of those issues. But it was with a whole different energy. So I was so impressed with the many clients that I worked with clearing a space, particularly with people with cancer. And so I went to my local hospital, which was Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, and asked them whether I could offer them a workshop in clearing a space, and I did that both for the staff and for patients, and they really were very impressed. They found it very successful, and they said to me, so just send us all your studies on this, because of course we want to make sure that this is an evidence-based process. And so there I was, 25 years out from having done my doctoral dissertation and never thinking I would go back and do research. But I was very motivated. And so there had been a study that was very inspiring to me by my colleague Doralee Grindler-Katona in 1982, where she used clearing a space with patients who had cancer. And she had found after 12 sessions of clearing a space with them, individual sessions, that they had better mood, better body image, and less depression. So I was inspired to do two studies, one in 2005 and one in 2010, where some colleagues and I used clearing a space to work with women with breast cancer. And so I'm going to just spend a little time sharing those studies with you, but if people have interest in reading about these studies, please send me an email, and I think Ed will say in the chat session how to reach me, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF with some articles where you can learn more about the studies, the methodology, the results, etc. But the basic result we got in both studies was that we found that the women who were taught to clear a space had an increase in physical, social, and emotional well-being. So let me tell you a little bit about the first study first. So this was a study that was done in 2005 with some colleagues, and we called it Clearing a Space and the Arts. And we went to a place in the Boston area that was called the Healing Gardens. Next slide. It's a beautiful 10-acre place that was where women, we had two retreat days on 2 Saturdays where they came, and they had clearing a space, and then they also had they did the arts, poetry writing, and drawing, and movement, and we combined all of these healing processes together. And so I'll give you an example of what we did with these women. So next slide. In this gorgeous spot that they were in, we had them do some clearing a space, and then we asked them the question, what are you needing for the next part of your journey with cancer? And many of them were heading into more chemotherapy or radiation. And then we gave them art materials where they could get their felt sense of what was needed. And the first person said that she needed to have more balance in her life. Next slide. Yeah. So she made a collage that embodied balance. The next woman said she needed playfulness. And next slide. She was too ill at the time to dance, but she said she wanted to dance, so we had given these women these beautiful colored scarves, and so people just threw their scarves at her, and you can see the expression on her face. I hope that there was a sense of joy and playfulness. And a third woman went out into the beautiful gardens and came back with some pieces of nature, parts of nature, and said that she wanted to remember the healing power of nature as she went through her chemo. And so here next are some verbatim transcripts of how the women described the cleared space that they got to. So one woman said, I imagine an elastic band stretching, kind of like a clothesline, and all my problems were put out by hand to dry. My clear space is bright and calm. The second woman said, oh my, this is how I felt before I got sick. I didn't think I could feel that way again. And the third said, I was just noticing all that's there, and then the thought came, put it in God's hands. It wasn't really a thought. I could imagine placing it outside of me in the center of a flower. And she cried, oh my God, I feel such relief just in letting go like this. So I knew that the kinds of complaints and difficulties that people with cancer have are that they have fear and anxiety and depression and often insomnia. There's all kinds of social disruption and stress. There are the physical symptoms and somatic concerns, and just the overall stress of making the life changes. So in the second study, I wanted to know if clearing a space alone could be an effective method for, next slide, for decreasing their stress and for enhancing well-being. And the second thing that my colleague and I wanted, Susan Lennox and I, wanted to figure out was whether the telephone would be an effective method for delivering clearing a space. And we found that the telephone was just as effective as of doing the clearing the space in person. And in fact, for some people, being able to stay in their homes and lying on their beds or sitting on their couches was even more effective for them. So isn't that wonderful to know that this process doesn't have to be delivered in person? And when people are ill or in crisis, going to another appointment is often a big burden. So it's nice to know we can do this one-on-one on the phone. But I'm not going to tell you all the measures we use because I'll share those with people who are interested. But today I just wanted to share with you, next slide, what the women active.
And before we continue, I just wanted to let the participants know that we have about 10 to maybe 15 minutes left where we want you to put your questions and comments in the chat area. And for anyone that doesn't get their question answered tonight, you can email me, Ed Glauser, at info@mindbodymedicinenetwork.com, and we will get that email to Joan, and she will answer it for you. So back to you, Joan.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted you to see what happened in the 20-minute session, and because it was research, we only gave 20 minutes for clearing a space because we wanted everyone to have the same amount of time. So here's two examples that I'll just read to you. One woman began the session by saying, I feel disconnected, scattered, annoyed. I'm annoyed at my husband. Maybe he's feeling neglected. And by the end of the 20 minutes, she said, I feel clearer and calmer. I need to be still and just look at what's really important. Second woman came in and she was very upset about the death of a woman in her cancer support group. She could feel fear in the pit of her stomach, and she had anxiety about various day-to-day issues. And by the end, she said, I feel calmer having expressed my anxieties and fears. I feel relaxed and peaceful, and unloading problems makes me feel like dancing. So at the end of the study, we asked the women in an interview, what about this was useful for you? And here are some of what we found, that they said they felt more calm and peaceful. They had greater awareness and insight. They had less worries, more clarity. They could regulate their moods better, and they felt more empowered by this process. So, Ed, I think we can go on to slide number 41. So what do clients learn when we can do this process of clearing a space with them? Well, they learn how to reduce stress with a method they can use on their own. Are you there? Everyone there?
We are all here, Joan.
Okay.
Yes.
They learn how to symbolize what they're feeling inside, and they learn how to find distance from pressing issues. That's so important, because if our issues are sitting on our lap, breathing down our neck, we can't get the right distance to really get some space from them. So learning how to get the right distance is an important part of clearing a space. And then I think clearing a space teaches us how to get to that all-fine space no matter what our circumstances are. So now I'd like to give you the opportunity to clear your space. So you can again put down anything you're holding. And I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And let's begin by placing your attention in the center of your body. And take a few deep breaths, inviting your body to relax. And now I invite you to remember a time or place in which you felt wonderful or at peace. And if you can't remember such a time, you just might imagine one. And see if you can get yourself there with all your senses. What it felt like to be you. Anything you could see. Anything you could smell. What the air felt like on your skin. Really allow yourself to be there. And now ask yourself, what's between that sense of well-being or good feeling and how I am right now? And of course, if you're feeling good right now, you can just stay with that positive feeling. But if there's a discrepancy between that experience of feeling good and how you are right now, I invite you to sense into where you are right now without falling into any problems, and just see what's there, what's in the way of feeling perfectly fine. And we're going to take each concern one at a time. So what's one thing, some issue or concern or problem that might be in the way between you and feeling fine tonight? We're in this moment. When it comes, please don't fall into it. And just notice how you're holding it in your body. What's it feel like to be you with that one? Is it tight or heavy? In your throat or your chest or your abdomen? And then just see It has a name to it. But you're not working on it and you're not falling into it. You're just noticing it's there. And now I'm going to invite you to wrap it up as a package and to imagine placing it outside of your body at the right distance away for this issue. It's good to exhale when you do that, to take a big breath and place it at the right distance away. Breathing it out. Now I invite you to come back into your body and just notice if it's a little lighter without that one. You might ask, except for that, am I all clear or all fine inside? You might be, or there might be something else that wants your attention. Just notice what's there, and if something else comes up again, just notice how you're holding this one in your body. If there's a quality to it, then don't fall into it, but just be gentle and compassionate with it. Oh, yes, that one's there. I can come back to that another time, but right now I'm going to just take that whole thing about that, whatever that is, and wrap it all up. And I'm going to place that one at the right distance away for that. Just place that one, a big breath. And then when your attention comes back inside yourself, see if it's a little lighter with that one. Imagining that one were all resolved or wasn't in the way anymore. And just see if you would feel any lighter or any clearer. And again, just say, except for that, am I pretty clear inside? And there may be another one that comes up. If so, oh yes, that's there. I'm going to just welcome it, befriend it. And then when I've just spent a little time noticing it, I'm going to wrap that one up and place that one at the right distance away. It might be a different place you want to put that one or the same. And now, I might, of course, be going too quickly for some of you, too slowly for others, which is why this method is best done one-on-one. But now I'm going to invite you to notice whether, in addition to those concerns and issues that you have, if you also have a background sense, a kind of a background mood or flavor that you're carrying right now. Maybe it's typical of you. See if you can find words that would capture that. Maybe feeling a little tense or a little tired or stressed or too busy. Get what's right for you there. What are the right words to capture that one? Or the right image. And now we're going to see if there's a way to wrap that up too. And this is a tricky one because we're going to see what it's like to be you without that familiar background sense. And see if you can place that at the right distance away too. And then just notice if it's a little more open or clear or uncluttered inside yourself right now. It may not be perfectly clear because you don't have the benefit of someone just being with you at each step. But I invite you now to take a vacation from all of those issues and concerns and to spend some time in the clearer space, a place where you don't have to do anything. Just allow yourself to be, and notice that you are not your problems, even though you have them. You're much larger. And you might notice if there's a word or a phrase or an image that would capture or represent that clearer space as you have it in this moment. You might try out different words or images and see if there's one that's a fit. And then I'm going to ask you, see if it's right to ask yourself, how can I have more of this in my life? More of this sense that I have right now in the clearer space? And just let your body tell you what it knows. How can I have more of this? And just wait for it to tell you something. And then when you're ready, very gently and slowly, you can open your eyes, come back into the room. And it might be lovely for people to write in the chat space if they had a word or a phrase or an image for their clearer space, so we can share them with each other. And if Ed and Heather, you would like to share yours, I'd be open to hearing that.
Well, for me, Joan, this is Ed. I had the thou feeling of beingness, but it was thou, Thou.
Ah, a thou feeling of beingness.
And I had one of being unburdened.
Ah. So that's the word that you really could experience that, right? That sense of
It's like something, a weight being lifted off.
Like a weight being lifted off. That's lovely. That's great. So we will send you the Clearing a Space protocols. They're in your slides. I didn't want to put them on the screen while you were doing this process because I wanted you to stay within yourself. So you'll have those when Ed sends you the whole webinar. So I want to very briefly, because we're almost out of time and I want to have time for your questions, just go over 4 uses of clearing a space. So it can be used for stress reduction and self-care. Self-care for ourselves as healthcare practitioners, for ourselves as helpers. It also can be used at the start of any kind of session in body work or coaching or psychotherapy or medical appointment. And again, we can go through this process. You'll have the protocol, or you can in a more casual way, just say, before we begin, just check inside and see what needs our attention most today. And therapists often find that this is a way to be very time effective, that instead of clients telling you stories for 20 minutes and then getting to what they wanted to share, they can just find that, within 3 to 5 minutes can find the thing that really needs attention or that they really want to, that's really beckoning to them, right? And it's also good for medical appointments. A gynecologist I know said that it's made a big difference in her practice. It used to be that as she got up and put her hand on the doorknob, her patients would then tell their real concerns. And so now she starts by saying, before we begin, I invite you to just close your eyes and take a pause and see what are 2 or 3 things that are most important we cover. And she said rarely now when she gets up to leave do people have that panicky look in their eyes. They feel more complete. Okay? It's also a process you can use when you're beginning a support group. It's a lovely way for people to get centered and to find what they want to share. I use it whenever I teach any kind of class or before any meeting that I'm leading, because then I have people just spend a little time clearing out their personal issues so they can be a lot more present for the meeting or the class. And it's very useful before activities such as focusing or meditation or art making or prayer or any other contemplative activity. Right? So it has many different uses. And the benefits, I think, and just to summarize for you, is the first is that it brings us into the present moment. And I think every spiritual tradition says that the opening to beingness that Ed experienced is coming into the present moment, right? Not being in the past or the future. And when we're clearing a space, we're present to ourselves and we're in the present moment. It also invites us to treat ourselves with gentleness and curiosity. It helps us to release bodily, physiological stress and tension, because we're not just closing our eyes and trying to get to a good space. We're actually moving into every stress-producing concern, and then we're placing it away from us. So we're releasing things on a bodily level. And then it teaches us how to connect to concerns without being overwhelmed by them. Now, there's this phrase that Eugene Genlin has: we don't have to stick our head in the soup to get a whiff of it. And clearing a space teaches us how to get a whiff of our issues and concerns without getting overwhelmed by them. Right? And it offers us the right distance from pressing issues, right? Not so far away that we're avoiding them, and not so close that we're overwhelmed by them. And then it also encourages us a wider perspective. It teaches us in a way that we're not only our problems, we're much bigger. So for some people, it opens on to spirituality. It can offer a direction for forward living, a resource that we have. And because while you can do it alone, it's best done in a partnership or a pair, a peer pair, or with your healthcare provider and your client. It provides a relational process that kind of is very intimate, really, to share those very intimate things of what you're holding in this moment in your body with someone else. It creates a closeness. So I said that Eugene Genlin was the one who first described this process, but I'm going to end with the words of our 14th century mystic poet Rumi, who says, "There is a life force within your soul. Seek that life. There's a gem in the mountain of your body. Seek that mine. O traveler, if you're in search of that, don't look outside yourself. Look inside yourself and seek." So I hope that you will find a very helpful website called www.focusing.org, where you will find hundreds of articles to download